Hey, Rick McBride here with McBride Realty Group, your property masters, and 5 minutes of free time. Today we've done part one and part two of the contract. So today I want to pick up on part three of the as-is residential contract for sale. This is the Florida Realtors version approved by the Florida Bar. We left off. We're on section 3, which is time for acceptance of the offer and counteroffers, the effective date. So what this is if it's not signed by the buyer and seller, an executed copy delivered to all parties on or before, and you put a date in there, this offer shall be deemed withdrawn and the deposit, if any, returned to the buyer. So what this is when you make your offer, let's say you make your offer, today is what, the 20th, and your offer, you want it to be good till tomorrow, the 21st. Then you would put the 21st in there, and then the seller has until the 21st to accept or counter the offer. Unless otherwise stated, time for acceptance for any counter offers will be within 2 days after the day the counter offer is delivered. So if someone counters, if they counter your offer, you have 2 days to reply. Another little thing that happens when you're in the counter and counter offer, especially in this market, if a new offer comes in, that seller can take that offer. So you want to, if you're going to put an offer in these days, make sure that you're putting in a good aggressive offer if you really like the house. So the effective date, this is a very important date because this is the effective date is the date that all of the time-sensitive items in the contract kick in. The effective date of the contract shall be the date when the last one of the buyer and seller has signed or initialed and delivered this offer or final counteroffer. So you have to sign and deliver. So how do you deliver it? Well, in the old days we used to drive it over, but now delivering email is fine as long as you've delivered it and you can show that you sent the email. That would then be the effective date. Now if you delivered it and someone else needed to initial and send it back, the effective date is going to be when they send it back. And during that time, the whole contract is still open for negotiation, and anyone can sneak in and for the seller give them more, or for the buyer you would potentially you'd lose the house. Next we have the closing date. This is a little bit of a throw of the dart in these days, but basically you select a date that the closing of this transaction shall occur and that the closing documents will be furnished and executed. So this is the date that we intend to close the property, and as a buyer you intend to buy it, as a seller you intend to sell it at the time established by the closing agent. So the closing agent will work with you to work out a time. Paragraph 5 is extension of the closing date. The extension of the closing date, if paragraph 8b is checked and closing funds from the buyer are not available on the closing date due to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau disclosure requirements. That's basically the closing disclosure now that was put into law last year. Then the closing shall be extended for such period necessary to satisfy those requirements, provided the period is not longer than 10 days. In the event of force majeure, which is a hurricane or something, some type of act of God is what it used to be. Now they call it force majeure. Causes services essential for the closing to be unavailable, including the unavailability of utilities or hazard insurance or homeowners insurance. The closing date shall be extended as provided in Standard G, which we will discuss later. Basically, a force majeure will cause the closing to be canceled. Not canceled, but extended. Obviously, no one will want to be out in a hurricane doing a closing. Anyway, section 6 is occupancy and possession. And basically, occupancy and possession, the seller shall deliver occupancy and possession of the property free of tenants, so no tenants, occupants and future tenancies, so no future people. Also at closing, the seller shall have removed all personal items and trash from the property, and shall deliver all keys, garage door openers, access devices, and codes as applicable to the buyer. If occupancy is to be delivered before closing, buyer assumes all the risk of loss to the property from the date of occupancy. So what that means is, if the buyer is able to move in before closing, then they assume all the risk for any loss of property or personal property. And they also shall be responsible and liable for maintenance from that date, and shall be deemed to have accepted the property in its existing condition at the time of taking occupancy. Section B here says check if it's subject to a lease or occupancy after closing. So that means if the property does have tenants in it and the lease extends past the closing date, you check this box to let the buyer know, because that lease will encumber the property. If it's after closing or intended to be rated by third parties, the facts and terms thereof shall be disclosed, so the lease basically needs to be disclosed in writing by the seller to the buyer, and copies of the lease shall be delivered within 5 days after the effective date. Remember, the effective date is the last day that the last initial was delivered. If buyer determines that the lease terms are not acceptable, they may terminate the contract by providing written notice of such selection within 5 days after the receipt of the lease from the seller, and buyer shall be refunded the deposit, their deposit. So they have 5 days to review the leases, and once they review the leases, then they can at that point cancel the contract. Estoppel letters and seller's affidavit shall be provided pursuant to Standard D. If the property is intended to be occupied by the seller after closing, there's a different rider for that. So this is not renting back to the seller, and this does not have to do with the estoppel or the HOA. This is strictly if there's a lease encumbering the property and the tenant will be staying, then the lease should be provided, and they have 5 days to cancel. That does it for number 3, part 3 of the contract. We will be back in the next couple days